In this video, we're going to be looking at acid-base regulation by the kidneys. To regulate blood pH, the kidneys can work by excreting hydrogen ions into the urine or reabsorbing bicarbonate ions. And we're going to see this interplay is going to take place, especially when we get to acid-base homeostasis in our next unit. So it becomes really important. So I'm going to go over just some of the bases on how the kidneys can regulate your pH either by excreting hydrogen ions or absorbing hydrogen ions, or reabsorbing bicarbonate, or not reabsorbing bicarbonate, depending on what the pH is in the blood. So for example, if you have a blood pH that's really low, it's becoming more acidic, then your kidneys are going to want to reabsorb more bicarbonate to help balance out the acidity in your blood, to help balance out that pH. So how can they go about reabsorbing more bicarbonate? Well, the bicarbonate reabsorption occurs primarily in the proximal convoluted tubule. About 90% of your bicarbonate is going to be reabsorbed there. Bicarbonate can't pass through the cells of the proximal convoluted tubule's membrane, and so it must be reabsorbed indirectly, not in the form of bicarbonate. So how does this happen? So to increase the reabsorption of bicarbonate, when you have a blood pH that drops, where you have more hydrogen ions in that blood, those hydrogen ions and bicarbonate are going to be filtered, and that glomerulus here at your proximal convoluted tubule. Remember that renal corpuscle has a glomerulus, has a glomerular capsule, and that's going to bring that filtrate right into the proximal convoluted tubule. Well, when your urine is really acidic due to an increase in hydrogen ions in the blood or a decrease in pH, that bicarbonate that's coming through here is going to combine with hydrogen ions to form carbonic acid within the filtrate of the proximal convoluted tubule. Well, the carbonic acid is then converted to CO2 and water by an enzyme called carbonic anhydrase. You might remember that enzyme when we talked about blood and how this works in red blood cells. Well, within that filtrate, you have this carbonic anhydrase that'll take that carbonic acid and break it down very, very quickly to water and CO2. Water and CO2 can be absorbed by the proximal convoluted tubule cells. Bicarbonate can't, but water and CO2 can. When that CO2 and water gets into the proximal convoluted tubule cells, carbonic anhydrase found in the proximal convoluted tubule cells is going to take that water and CO2 and combine it very quickly to form carbonic acid. This carbonic acid can dissociate into bicarbonate and hydrogen ions, and that bicarbonate then diffuses into the blood through the membrane here, the proximal convoluted tubule, to raise your bicarbonate levels. That's going to help combat that decrease in pH due to an increase in hydrogen ions. The hydrogen ions can then be pumped out of the proximal convoluted tubule back into the filtrate, where it can combine with more bicarbonate to bring that bicarbonate into the proximal convoluted tubule cells. Remember, not directly, but in the way of making carbonic acid, dissociates to water and CO2, and that water and CO2 then moves through into the proximal convoluted tubule. So that's how you can reabsorb more bicarbonate. And we're also going to see that the kidneys can actually make bicarbonate. Well, what do we do with the hydrogen ions? So let's say our pH has gone down. We have an increase in hydrogen ions in the blood. We can get rid of that in the urine by not reabsorbing hydrogen ions. We can also pump hydrogen ions out in that distal convoluted tubule. So shown here is a cell in the distal convoluted tubule pumping hydrogen ions out. Well, as you pump hydrogen ions out, it can cause a pH of the urine to drop really, really low. But the pH of the urine doesn't drop usually below 4.5. Otherwise, if it did drop really, really low, it can damage the cells that are lining the tubule, or the collecting ducts, or papillary ducts, or the pelvis, ureters, urinary bladder, urethra. Inside the filtrate that came from your blood, you have phosphate ions. And these phosphate ions from the blood, via this filtration, they can combine on with hydrogen ions. So here we have hydrogen phosphate, and it can combine with a hydrogen, also called monohydrogen phosphate. It can combine with a hydrogen ion that gets released in this disconvoluted tubule, or hydrogen ions that are just in the filtrate, and it can form dihydrogen phosphate. Well, that hydrogen is going to combine with that hydrogen phosphate to make dihydrogen phosphate. And remember, free hydrogen ions are what affect pH. And if they're bound to another molecule, they don't affect pH. So these phosphates, when they bind onto hydrogen and make dihydrogen phosphate, they're tying up the hydrogen, so the hydrogen does not cause a decrease in pH when bound to this buffer known as hydrogen phosphate. Ammonia can be produced by tubule cells from deamination of amino acids. And we talked about how the amino group of the amino acid, when it's taken off the amino acid by deamination, it becomes ammonia. And then in the body can convert the ammonia to urea. If you have these tubule cells, they can actually make ammonia. And that ammonia goes into the urine. Well, what's the purpose of having ammonia in the urine? What that ammonia will do is it can combine onto hydrogen ions to make ammonium ion, which is shown here, NH4. When it does that, it's tying up the hydrogen ions so it doesn't affect the pH. So ammonia within the filtrate can combine onto hydrogen ions so that the pH doesn't drop too low. It doesn't drop below that 4.5 level. We're looking at metabolic acidosis alkalosis, and we're also going to be talking about respiratory acidosis and alkalosis. We're going to see that the kidneys are really important in helping to regulate your body's pH. For example, if you're in alkalosis, meaning that the pH of your blood is going to be higher, you have less hydrogen ions, you're in alkalosis, there will be less hydrogen ions present in the filtrate, so less bicarbonate gets reabsorbed. Because if you're in alkalosis, your kidneys, you don't want your kidneys to reabsorb more bicarbonate. Well, with less hydrogen ions to combine with bicarbonate, you make less carbonic acid, which you have less water and CO2 being absorbed to make carbonic acid within the proximal convoluted tubule cells, and here's that bicarbonate. So you reabsorb less bicarbonate. So in the case of alkalosis, you're getting rid of bicarbonate in the urine because you don't reabsorb as much. In acidosis, the proximal convoluted tubule cells can make bicarbonate if you're in acidosis. Acidosis, the blood pH is going down. So you want more bicarbonate. Well, besides reabsorbing more bicarbonate, we're going to see that the kidneys actually can make bicarbonate. And they use the amino acid called glutamine to make bicarbonate. And then that bicarbonate gets released by those kidney cells, those tubule cells, into the blood in order to reduce the acidosis. So your pH is going down in acidosis. You make bicarbonate within the kidneys. You reabsorb more bicarbonate within the kidneys. And that's going to help your pH to come back up to the normal level. Now, if you have any questions on this, please let me know. We're going to go over in a lot more detail later on this, as well as other processes to help in acid-base homeostasis within the body. In the next video, we're going to be going over urine and the components of urine.